And he talked about Tyler Boyd before they signed him. And answering a question about Tyler Boyd, he then launched into this whole diatribe about how much they love Treylon Burks. Like, we've got a role for Treylon on this team. We believe in Treylon. Treylon broke us down in the huddle after practice. Treylon ran 3,100 yards. Treylon had the top speed of 27.5 miles per hour. Treylon's the best. Treylon's great. And everybody walked away from that saying they've got a plan for Treylon Burks. And I thought, what plan? There's one football. You going to give the ball to Burks over DeAndre Hopkins? No. You going to give the ball to Burks over Calvin Ridley, who you just paid $50 million guaranteed to? No. You going to give the ball to Burks over Tyler Boyd, who you just signed? No. You going to give it to him over Tajay Spears or Tony Pollard? No. You're not going to do that. There's no role for him. The role is, hey, we want you to sit on the bench, and if one of these guys gets hurt, we're going to put you in the lineup, and then we hope you produce. That's the role, but that's not a role. That's like telling a guy like, hey, man, we've got a role for you. We want you to sit on the bench, and then every now and then we might pinch hit, and we may put you in there. That's not a role. Third base is a role. That's not a role. So I just felt like it was ridiculous that Brian Callahan was telling us that there was a role out there for Treylon Burks. Well, today, as Brian Callahan was asked about and brought up, Treylon Burks was out there as the gunner on the punt team. I've never seen Treylon Burks play gunner before. Now, I'm fascinated to hear what Trevor has to say about this when he comes on the show, because Trevor really, I do think, we were standing there when Burks was running his tush off down the field on these punts, but I think that there may be some positives there. But afterwards, Brian Callahan was asked about Treylon Burks and him needing to be on the punt team. Here's what Brian Callahan said.
Absolutely, he's going to have to contribute. You only get so many hats on game day, and if he's one of those guys on game day, we're going to have to find a place for him, because those special teams, guys like him should be great special teams players on top of it, just because of his size and speed. And so the gunner thing is something I think he's very capable of doing. There might be some more roles for him in the other phases as well. But yeah, anytime you're not the full-time starter, you're going to have to contribute somewhere on game day. And I think Trey's attitude and approach to special teams has been fantastic. And so I'm excited to see what he could do for him. I think he's an asset on special teams.
When they signed Calvin Ridley, I said, I think they're going to trade Treylon Burks. And everyone was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, I think they'll trade him for like a 4th or a 5th round pick. And it's like, but is a 4th or a 5th round pick better than Burks? No. But the reality with Treylon Burks is he's under contract for 2 more years. And for those 2 years, this year, unless he plays special teams, he's not going to be active on game day. Now, I'd never seen Burks play special teams outside of when Mike Vrabel had him on the kickoff return team on like that front line, which never made any sense to me. But I'm watching the Titans, and I'm looking, and I'm like, they basically recruited over Treylon Burks. They basically decided that they were going to bring in Calvin Ridley because they couldn't count on Burks, which was the right call. But then when they told everybody that, oh, no, there's a role for Burks, you'll see. And now it's like, actually, when it comes to Burks, there really isn't a role. He's just going to be on the bench. So in order to get him on the field on Sundays, we're going to need him to go cover the punt team. Like, that's where it is. And I will give Brian Callahan credit, because while I thought it was total baloney the second he said it, I thought it was baloney. Like, I thought it was ridiculous, this idea that there's a role for Burks. What do you mean there's a role for Burks? There's 8 other guys you want to get the football to before you want to get it to him. I mean, there's only so many plays you can go over the course of the week to install the game plan. You can't game plan for Treylon Burks. But had a nice ring to it. Positive. People believed it. And now they're playing him on special teams. And so now they've kind of massaged this whole Tyler Boyd, Treylon Burks thing into, no, he's got a role for us, but in order for him to be able to make it to game day, he's going to have to be able to get in there, and he's going to have to be able to help on the punt team at the gunner position, and he's going to have to help in the other special teams, and he's being treated the way that Nick Westbrook-Akine was treated before Nick Westbrook-Akine became a wide receiver on this team. Like, that's how Nick Westbrook-Akine got into the games as a rookie. That's how he made the team, is by doing this stuff. There's no role for Burks. The role for Burks is, we don't think there's anybody out there who's better than Treylon Burks that we could go get, that in case one of these three guys gets hurt, we could put in the game. That's the role for Treylon Burks. And look, I'm not saying Burks can't do it. We talked last week about the truth of Treylon Burks. Derek Mason did not get a lot of opportunities at wide receiver before Kevin Dyson tore his ACL. It happened. Derek Mason and Chris Sanders got put back into the starting lineup, and Chris Sanders and Derek Mason produced. Chris Sanders caught 6 passes over 35 yards, and Derek Mason set an NFL record for all-purpose yards in a season. And so, in theory, that could be Burks. Get banished to the bench, keep your head up. You guys know Chris Sanders. You know Chris isn't putting his head down. Keep your head up, get out there on the bench, and there you once that moment comes, go for it. But in order for you to be able to do that, you have to be on the punt team. The more I talk this through, the more I'm like, you know what? Bravo to Brian Callahan, because he really did kind of massage, this whole Treylon Burks has a role thing, and now he's got Burks out there on special teams. And hell, I would hope that Burks could run down the field faster than most guys that weren't picked in the first round to be able to go cover a punt. I would hope that with Stonehouse, if he ever comes back, he could bang the crap out of the ball, put it up. We've really been focused on hang time with Stonehouse over the years, and that Burks could go under it, catch it, and all of a sudden down a punt at the 8-yard line. And it'd be nice if this team could start downing punts inside the 10. But I do think it's funny when it's like Brian Callahan tells everybody after they recruit twice over Treylon Burks that no, he's got a role on this team. Yeah, he's got a role, all right. Gunner. That's the role they have for him. 615-737-1025. Your phone lines are driven by WilsonCountyHunter.com. So Coach T from the Titans Coliseum. The Titans Coliseum is slowly, I did not know that this podcast existed until last night. And the Titans Coliseum, I believe this is Coach T. Connor, if you could, the Titans Coliseum cut on me from last night's podcast. I did not know that this podcast existed until somebody said, hey, they were talking about you on the Titans Coliseum podcast. Here's what they said. And I listened to it. I loved it. Here's what they said.
He got 4 hours worth of hot takes, bro. That's his radio show Monday through Friday. Y'all make sure y'all listen to, man. Cause like I said, shout out to Jared, man. That crazy mother. But man, he got 4 hours worth of hot takes. He does this thing on Friday, Hot Take Friday or Fireball Friday, whatever they call it. Man, look, man, that shit happens every single day. All you got to do is turn on his show, and I guarantee you, he is saying some hot shit. Jared, god dang it, Jared will come up with some shit that ain't nobody even thinking about. And when he say this shit, it's like, what the fuck is you talking? Like, why did you even think of this shit? Like, come on, man.
I love that. So Coach T is called in on the program from the Titans Coliseum podcast. Coach T, go ahead.
Man, good afternoon, Jay. What's going on, buddy?
Go ahead, man.
Hey, man. Hey, first of all, I want to tell you I appreciate you for gracing the presence on the Pull Up Podcast show last night. It was absolutely excellent, man, and I appreciate the realness. And again, like you said, everyone don't like exactly what you say. You just tell it like it is. And the one thing I've got to ask, it came to me earlier today, and that was we keep talking about the NFL and different positions, are moving around, and we know the time of the running back is being lost because the quarterback is so important. But whatever happened to the kick return? I really don't like watching
They've
football
changed it.
because no one returns the ball no more. We can't even have unless it's a punt. We don't have a good situation because all these kickers are kicking the damn ball through the end zone. Why not just start on the 20-yard line?
No, so they've changed the punt rule. Coach T, first of all, I loved being on your podcast yesterday, and you are the man. And I appreciate your phone call, and I appreciate you. They got my podcast mixed up there on the different – we got so many podcasts, but Coach T's pull-up podcast I was on yesterday, that's a good man right there. It was a good show, and I did it, so search for it on YouTube. They've changed the kickoff rule, and I have no idea what it's going to look like this year. No idea. 615-737-1025 is our phone number. Speaking of that, speaking of wide receivers, we'll get into your phones. But I do want to go over the Justin Jefferson contract. Apparently, one NFL expert says this is actually going to be good for guys, like even guys on the Titans. We'll get to that next. Stillman and Company, 102.5, 106.3 The Game.
the Jefferson deal. This one I went over last week because the ripple effect of Waddle's deal behind A.J. Brown. Now we have the Jefferson deal. It still involves this massive group. T. Higgins, Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks, Deontay Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs. All those guys plan on benefiting from this deal. They're not going to get this deal. But they're all going to make a little more money than you think because the standard for dollars has been moved up twice now in 10 days.
That was Pat Kerwin on SiriusXM NFL Radio, and he was sitting there talking about, hey, look, the Justin Jefferson deal will affect all the wide receivers. And I heard this yesterday when I was driving, and I thought to myself, I was like, I'm sitting here in the car. I'm listening to him talk about how, this will affect all these guys. And he brings up DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, he really brought up everybody there, right? Like, now, look, they're not going to get Justin Jefferson. They're not going to get Justin Jefferson money, but they're going to get money. They're going to get the bump off of this. And I thought, really? So this Justin Jefferson $35 million a year contract, this is going to affect DeAndre Hopkins' next contract. And then I thought about it. I'm like, I'm not so sure it does. Because if it's going to affect the DeAndre Hopkins contract, then it's like, do you want to get in and get a DeAndre extension done before all of it, now CeeDee Lamb signs and Jamar Chase signs? And the amount of people in the media, it's really amazing because the amount of people in the media that always act like they're for the player and against the man, which is the NFL. And then when something like the Justin Jefferson contract happens, the amount of people I've heard in the media that are like, CeeDee Lamb is not worth Justin Jefferson money. First of all, their stats are incredibly comparable. Incredibly comparable. Like, it's wild when you compare the two. Now, Jefferson has more yards and more yards per reception. But outside of that, Lamb has pretty much more everything. Jefferson has one Offensive Player of the Year award, but they've both been named All-Pro. They're both great. If the media was so pro-player, they'd be like, hey, you got to give CeeDee Lamb that money. You got to give Jamar Chase that money. Instead, it's all, well, you can't pay CeeDee Lamb that kind of money. And I'm like, that's not how this works. CeeDee Lamb gets the next contract. He's the next guy. CeeDee Lamb is an elite, top-of-the-market, all-pro wide receiver. If CeeDee Lamb were to be a free agent, CeeDee Lamb would get more than $35 million a year. But DeAndre Hopkins and Deontay Johnson and all of those guys, starting from T. Higgins on down, Stephon Diggs, they are not Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, or Jamar Chase. In some cases, like Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins, they used to be that guy, but they're not that guy anymore. So when I hear that, this is going to affect all of them, I think to myself, well, maybe you should think about getting a DeAndre Hopkins contract done just so that you can get out in front of it, because if you want him and Levis together, and then I thought to myself, wait a minute. If all these guys are going to be free agents, from T. Higgins to Amari Cooper to Stephon Diggs to Deontay Johnson to Keenan Allen to DeAndre Hopkins. If all these guys are going to be free agents, then wouldn't you rather them go into free agency and then let the league sort it out? I don't know how much money Keenan Allen's making, but the Chargers went to Keenan Allen and asked him to take a pay cut. Because even though they didn't have any other receivers, they didn't value Keenan Allen. And so, as I really thought critically about this, instead of just taking Pat Kerwin, and I love Pat Kerwin, and I use him as a reference all the time because I think he is brilliant. As much as I think that, I'm like, I'm not sure I see any NFL team saying, you know what? We got to pay Deontay Johnson more now because Justin Jefferson's worth $35 million a year. Those guys aren't the same player. Those guys aren't even remotely the same player. And the desire for that kind of player is not the same. Just think about DeAndre's first offseason. This was the year after the big boom at wide receiver that started with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams and then A.J. Brown and Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin. And all those guys all got paid more money than we all thought they were going to get. Cooper Kupp just got a raise because. And so the next year, everybody knew the free agent wide receivers were getting paid. And then all of a sudden, DeAndre Hopkins gets put out there in the middle of the offseason and nobody wanted him. Dallas didn't want him. The Giants didn't want him. The Lions didn't want him. He said that. Nobody wanted him. And so the Titans threw in a lowball offer, and he ended up accepting it because it was the best he could get. And I'm supposed to believe that's not going to happen again when the market gets flooded with all these guys. And not only that, a guy like DeAndre, he might take the first good deal he gets because he's experienced what it's like to be out there and nobody really interested and you don't want to overplay your hand. And now you're sitting there and you have to take a 2-year deal at $13 million a year. And it's like, my goodness gracious. There will be guys that get a bump because of the market at receiver. T. Higgins will get a bump when he enters unrestricted free agency because Calvin Ridley and Higgins, I think Higgins is better than Ridley, and I think he's younger than Ridley. So I would have probably paid Higgins more anyways. But Ridley was the top free agent signing this year, and that was at $23 million a year. Well, Nico Collins is 24. So my guess is Higgins is going to come in around 28, 29. So maybe that's a little bit of a bump. But that's probably what Higgins gets on the open market anyways. I don't really think that these guys, Deontay Johnson, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, are going to get much more money just because Justin Jefferson's signing for $35 million a year. In fact, the deal that catapulted the wide receiver market was the Christian Kirk contract in Jacksonville. The way this came about was the top free agent wide receiver was Devontae Adams, and he got tagged. And so once Devontae got tagged, there were no good wide receivers out there except for Christian Kirk. He was like the one guy. He was kind of a 3 in Arizona. And so he was out there. But, like, how good is Christian Kirk? Now, I actually think Christian Kirk's pretty good. But at the time, even I thought the Christian Kirk contract was crazy. But what happened was this. Jacksonville knew they had to get a receiver for their young quarterback. Kind of the way that you had to get a receiver for your young quarterback this past offseason. So Jacksonville, who's as undesirable at this point as any spot in the league, they've been terrible for years. They've got the number 1 pick 2 years in a row. People think Trevor Lawrence might be a bust. You are not convincing Christian Kirk to sign with you unless you buy him. How do you buy him? You give him the kind of contract that he can't refuse. $18 million a year. It's like, Lord have mercy. Who thought they'd give him that? He signs for it. They had to overpay to get him. Reset the entire market. And even then, a year later, DeAndre was still $13 million for 2 years, and clearly had a suppressed market because of his age. So I love Pat. But I don't really think the Justin Jefferson market really does much unless you're the Dallas Cowboys and you have to pay CeeDee Lamb. I don't think it really does much unless you're, I don't know, the Bengals and you've got both Chase and Higgins. I don't think it affects a lot of the guys in the middle. And again, Nico Collins got $24 million last week. If Justin Jefferson's worth 35, does Nico Collins say, well, now I'm worth 27? Because he's not. And I don't think Houston has to pay him 27. So I'm not sure it really changes the DeAndre contract. 615-737-1025. The phone number 615-737-1025. We are to your phones on all of this next. Stillman and Company, 1025, 106 The Game.
Obviously, he's had some injuries, injured last year, and it's impacted, honestly, the production of